Welcome to Off the Record. We are officially in double digits if you're listening to this episode. It has been a really fun 10 weeks so far. We're going to keep going. You can find us at offtherecord.fm. We keep updated there with our show notes, so if you're listening along to this show and you say, hey, I want to check out that link about something Jesse and I talked about, head over there. You can also leave us feedback in the form of email or Tumblr asks or whatever, and we might include that in the show. So thank you guys for listening. It's been so fun so far. Also, just to throw in there, if you go to iTunes and look up Off the Record podcast, leaving a review is a huge help. It helps more people find us, so that'd be great as well. Anyway, just a little quick follow-up. We talked some more last week and probably the weeks before that about vinyl reissues. I had one more question from a listener, just how Bad Timing Records went about contacting Sony to do the Acceptance and Valencia reissues. The simple answer is a really miserable process. Jesse probably knows as well that just dealing with major label people, regardless of if they're nice or not, regardless of if they're evil people or not because they're at a major label, getting in touch with them doesn't matter what kind of person they are. It's going to be difficult and it's kind of impossible. We got really lucky. Someone that we knew was interested in doing this Acceptance reissue before us, and they lost interest, and Thomas was talking to them, and we kind of just went for it instead. Meaning we were handed contact info from someone else. And when it comes down to major labels, you need to get in touch with their licensing and their marketing departments and all of that. And there's no, there isn't a runforcoverrecords.com where you can go and you can email Jeff. It's not like that at major labels, unfortunately. So I just don't have great advice about how to find someone at some random label. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me at any of my 1,000 email addresses, and I'll be glad to point you in the right way. But dealing with major labels is just not a really fun experience, right, Jesse?
I think that puts it very nicely.
There's just a lot of red tape. And it takes 10 weeks to answer something, and that is always the worst. And then just another quick add-on to that question. Someone asked if Thomas and I had to get an S-Corp in order to even talk to Sony. No, we didn't. That's just, we needed to get the S-Corp if we wanted to move forward with actually manufacturing the vinyl. So it was good that we started doing that early, because by the time we needed to manufacture it, we had all our ducks in a row. And that's it for follow-up. So I think of this last week, the most exciting, or not really exciting, but the most frustrating source of event was this band, Upon a Burning Body. Had you ever heard of them before?
I had not, but after I heard their new song, I wish I had not heard of them after it too.
Interesting. I didn't listen. That's the difference between us. I just said, I can see their band logo is the same logo of all the other 100 metalcore bands on that one festival. I'll never know any of the bands playing because they all look exactly the same. And I didn't listen.
I like to know my trollcore and, know how horrible it sounds. And plus, I'm always hitting play in case it's as terrible as Falling in Reverse or Attila so I can get a good laugh.
I watched Falling in Reverse at Warped Tour yesterday, and it was great. It was everything I wanted.
Did you blow kisses at your boy Ronnie?
I was not allowed on stage, but he dropped a line in the second song about go put that in your blog and smoke it. So maybe he knew, maybe he was thinking of me up there in his onesie attire.
Aww.
I had a onesie on. It was awesome. Anyway, Upon a Burning Body. So maybe it was Wednesday night. This sounds right. Maybe it was Tuesday or Wednesday night of last week. Upon a Burning Body put a status on Facebook and Twitter just that their frontman had been missing for 2 days, and that they had contacted local authorities and all of that. I had not seen it. Upon a Burning Body's on Sumerian Records. We don't really cover many bands in that side of the world, so I didn't really see it. I knew the band name, though. I knew of the band. But a few of my friends that don't ever really hit me up about music news I haven't posted about messaged me, and they're like, hey, have you seen this? This is kind of weird, isn't it? Just of interest, wondering if I had heard anything about it, and I had not. So I poked around a little bit, and sure enough, there were all these people talking about, like, is this guy missing? Is he not? And did you see the original tweet, Jesse?
I did.
A lot of people automatically assume that, like, well, it seems like a prank because the tweet, I think, started with, like, breaking, as if, like, Property Zack had posted the story, right? But anyway, so in the sense it worked. It worked as a hoax. It ended up being a hoax. The band has still not really commented on it, but the owner of Sumerian Records, his name is Ash, he kind of ripped the band apart in a Facebook post. There's been some people like going back and forth about whether that was kind of staged as well, but it kind of read as legitimate as that guy can be from stories I've heard of him. But there was just so much back and forth of like, well, is this band so stupid or are they smart? And they posted a song at midnight, and that's probably the song Jesse heard, midnight the next day after they got torn apart by the world. And by the time I woke up, it had like over 100,000 plays. YouTube now is a different era, but Jesse, like even before kind of this age, have you always remember hoaxes, or has it mostly just been since the internet has been a thing?
Well, a hoax couldn't spread as fast. Me and Fid McKenty of Stuff You Will Hate and Creative Live fame often talk about this, of like how when you hear the crazy things about this of like old school hardcore days, you actually have to sometimes reaffirm that the rumors and crazy things like this were even true, because it was all the telephone game. And by the time the story got back, it'd be so insane that it was usually a lot of legend and not a lot of truth. I think, though, and I should say this, there was the internet through the whole time I've been in punk. Like, there is punk chat and alt punk and alt music hardcore on Usenet, but like, it just didn't spread the way it spreads now. And I think that there's the big thing of that everybody thinks going viral is their goal. And what I say all the time, and I write about a bunch of my book, is that like, why is viral this big goal of bands? Like, viral ends up being Rebecca Black or Chocolate Rain or Gangnam Style, where really you're just a joke and everybody's laughing at you. And I never get when people say that, I want to go viral, I want to go viral, I want to go viral. Because if you truly go viral, it's usually because we're laughing at you, not with you.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, I think, how that has transformed over time as well. Maybe 5 or 7 years ago, I don't know, during the quote unquote like neon scene, it seemed like that was really important because everyone had their MySpace. Everyone was either buying plays or getting real. It was all basically like, well, how can we one up this other band? And it kind of like, and the only way I think people started to do that was being like, oh, can we come up with something crazier? And it might not be idiotic like faking a kidnapping. But it might just be something where it's like, I don't know, just something dumb. Maybe like, who cut Pete Wentz's hair this week? I don't know. But it seemed like that kind of started with a Fall Out Boy world, and it got just very, very exaggerated very quickly. The last like big one I can remember before recent times was like when Fall Out Boy put out their last album before breaking up, Folie à Deux. They did a big campaign, and that was kind of it, I think. And I just feel like once we got to Twitter and like Bandcamp and things that seemed a little more grounded outside of that neon-y MySpace world, that it kind of became like a ground level natural building thing again, maybe, right? Like even just with experience with almost Man Overboard, like you didn't need to do flashy shit that was truly like a flash in the pan. It was just, how can we do things to keep people interested, but also to make it natural, so when this fad that we're doing about some virally thing this week blows over, that we don't have to create a whole new one next week. Because that's probably a really easy way to lose fans, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is like, people are always talking about going viral when it's really like, how do you do a sustained marketing campaign? And we got a little bit into this, but one of the things I should say is like, like whenever I've worked with a group on making a plan for their record, like we basically, the rule is let's do one big thing every month, and every 2 weeks something small at least, and in between we should be promoting those things all the time, and we're going to keep people talking. And like I make a calendar, and like this is what we're talking about, this is what we're promoting for these 2 weeks, and the big thing each month we're promoting that whole month. And that big thing could be anything from the upcoming headlining tour or even a support tour. on to, a new song, a new podcast episode we did, a new mixtape, whatever it may be, or like a cover song or whatever. Those can be some of the smaller things that are scattered throughout, but we're going to keep doing things to keep people talking, whether it's even just like doing an acoustic video in a weird setting or something like, but you got to keep people talking. And I think that that's the big thing is that I think so many people kind of blow their load on this viral lead up to their record where they're getting all this attention and people can't even buy the record yet, and it gets really, really silly. And I think that that's the thing we need to talk about is where crossing that line of cheese is such a bad idea. It's so hard to find the sweet spot of what's a interesting marketing idea and what's cheesy and what's just not that eventful.
It seems to be so difficult for bands to think about that, though. I think a lot of it has to do with a misguided team behind the band. Like, do you want all your merch to be Simpsons themed? Like, is that what's gonna sell for you a lot right now? But then
who's doing that?
You're not gonna have any sort of identity behind that. Well, I just feel like that's a good. I walked around Warped Tour yesterday, and there were many different variations of like a Simpsons shirt or, like a South Park character shirt, and it was for different bands. That was the thing. It's like it's getting to this point of we just need to, like, I see band X with the Simpsons shirt, so other band is going to be like, well, we need a South Park shirt. Like, it's kind of just, it's a lot less annoying than kidnapping someone falsely, but it's just another way of like, gotta one-up each other in this pointless way that, if you think about it beyond the immediate dollar sign, isn't going to get you anywhere. Like, I was talking about this at Warped Tour yesterday with a friend of just like a few different like current pop punk bands on the tour, and like there are some bands that have clearly been building something sustainably and it's growing and growing, and then there are a few other ones right now that it's like they are absolutely destroying it in the sense of a lot of fans right now, a lot of merch, a lot of money, but the substance of the music isn't there. So when that that could be the same band with the Simpsons t-shirt. So when that turns over in 2 years and that 14-year-old fan is 16 or 17 and they find like a brand new or Taking Back Sunday in between, like when that band writes that same exact album with not a ton of substance and the same kind of, we don't have an identity, here's just whatever is pop culturally in merch-wise, like, are you still going to buy it? It's kind of the same thing with that whole neon phase. Like, everything was just, how can we make this more purple?
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't want purple, right?
Well, even like the silly cartoon monster thing. Like, I loved when Thursday did that, like, generic scene T-shirt and had the unicorn farting money and everything. And it was like, I think that's the thing is like bands over and over. And I think this is going to kind of be a theme of this episode of what we're going to talk about is like, the key is to, you have to really work hard to find things that fit well with your music, but aren't just a bad imitation of everything everybody's doing. And you want to innovate, and not emulate. And so many of these bands just try to be a part of the scene and do the same things everybody's doing, but it gets really, really silly at times, and it's what makes bands not last. And but at the same time, I feel for the struggle of like trying to come up with something new and unique in marketing is takes a lot of effort, a lot of headspace, and a lot of observance of seeing what's going on. Like I had this band I know called Franchise, they just hit me up the other day with a press release, and they're doing this like mobile tour thing. I was like, okay, cool. This is like an idea I haven't seen done much, but
So what does that entail?
Like they're kind of just doing an internet tour. So they're basically doing the thing of like, for the next 30 days, or whatever, they're like, I don't know how long it actually is lasting, but they're like, putting out live stuff. They're putting out content as if they were on tour. Because they can't tour because they have jobs or whatever, college commitments or something. And so they're kind of giving this thing a shot at trying to make this something. I'm like, you know what? This is great. Like, I haven't seen this done, and this could be an area where, like, bands, there's a lot of bands who can't tour. There's even, I was hearing a discussion the other day about how all these bands that can't tour are now going to just do this steady monthly gigs and fans can come to them. Like, I don't know that that's going to work, but experiment with something at least, and don't just do the same things and imitate the same things that everybody's doing. People get so much more excited when you can find an authentic part of your music and intertwine that with something interesting and new, and putting in that effort is what separates great bands from mediocre bands.
Yeah, in my mind, what I would just say, or what I think we will continue to say, and I have to see this from, I get to see this now from like manager perspective, but then also just always from the site, is like, if it seems like you need to force yourself to come up with something that you think that you could be a manager and you're 30 years old and you need to put yourself in the perspective of being like a 15-year-old that hopefully is going to buy your band's merch. That's like probably not the right headspace to force yourself into, right? Same thing with the band, and you can speak to this a lot better than me, and we'll speak about it later in this episode, but just like, don't like forcing yourself what your 15-year-old or 18-year-old or 22, whatever age fan wants to hear from your music. Like, it's only healthy for so long, and then you focus about it to the point where it deteriorates your work. I was typing up earlier this morning an interview with Anne Berlin, and we had a conversation about how they went about their last album, because that band has had sort of two stylistic markers in their career, and whether they wanted their last album to be like a whole, not greatest hits in the sense of songs from the past albums, but like encompassing their whole career as a band, or if they just wanted to push for one really great last record. And he was like, well, we were forcing each other at first because we weren't really sure. How do you do something for the last time? But then we just they were like, well, we realized that wasn't working, and we just needed to do what naturally felt right. And that ended up being a better product for them. And sure, sometimes you'll come up with a great random idea that will end up winning out, and will even maybe be a little fake, but that's often just not the case. I think it's just, if you're not being natural to what you are and what your band might be with an identity, you're never going to have an identity. And I know, and that kind of gets into like the gross word of like branding yourself or whatever. But I think that's so important, especially now when it's really kind of transparent to see, like, if there are 50,000 people following that one band member on Twitter and they don't seem excited about anything new that the band is putting out, whether that has to do with merch or music or touring, it's probably because, like, well, maybe they're not excited, right?
I think, though, there's an interesting thing you treaded on there was, I'm 36 and I mostly produce music made for 16 to 24-year-olds. I'm old, I'm jaded, I've seen it all. As we often joke, I listen to really weird dance music a lot. I still have to, and it's the only thing I can do when I produce, is I have to make it interesting and good to me. And it's the same thing with when I managed bands and we were selecting merch, is you have to trust your gut. And the only thing that ever works is trusting your gut, because if you try to do things that you think other people will like, you usually fall flat on your face. And we'll get into this more later, because I think this is particularly pertinent to artists and how artists make good music. But you have to always be just having an emotional reaction to whatever it is in this world of art. And, obviously there's exceptions. That business ideas is not about an emotional reaction, but it's really always interesting to me, because, like, you could easily say, well, you're not a 16-year-old, so then shouldn't 16-year-olds be the ones who are helping make decisions and stuff? But the one thing is, I think that a lot of people really like a experienced eye or ear on these things, and you've developed tastes that are so refined and so complicated. And it's like, even one of the things, like, you and I have been talking about favorite records a lot lately, and one of the things I really got to thinking about is, like, I don't want to say I'm jaded as much as I've developed such a high standard for things from hearing so much over the years that I'm just not that impressed by very much these days. Because I've developed such a high standard that I only really want to hear the greatest things that come out each year. And I think that that's a lot of getting old. And then you get these really high standards, so you're able to achieve something really good. Whereas when you're 17, you're just impressed with everything, and everything's so exciting and cool and new.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I've had that struggle with the website in a lot of ways too, where it's like, what has made the website typically, and hopefully people feel the same way, but successful to me even, is that, like I've always said that I put the content on the website that I would want to engage with, regardless of what age I am, right? That's kind of the point. It's kind of like a lame industry word, but like evergreen content. And that means stuff that is always good. So when I'm doing an interview, I try not to just make them really topical about this band's new single or record and ask them 15 questions about that, because that can be kind of worthless when that album comes out. Sure, if we're talking about why a band member left the band, that's obviously very topical, but that might be something someone finds on Wikipedia 10 years later and finds interesting. And that's what I want, right? I don't want the Wikipedia link, but I want I want what I would want to find when I'm looking at a website for something that I might find there. So if I know Property Zack does hopefully really great interviews, then maybe I'm going to read that interview over another website because I know maybe I answer the better questions, or maybe Alt Press has better op-eds on certain things, so I'm going to go there for that, or whatever. But so when creating new content, let's just call them features. So whether it's if we had never done interviews and now we're branching out into interviews, like sometimes over the years I'll have I will be witness to other websites, like whether they're competitors or not, doing these features that I think are really great, and me kicking myself being like, oh God, why did I not think about that first, right? Like Alter the Press a few years ago did this feature called like Albums That Changed My Life with bands. And I was like, wow, that's got to be great for traffic. Like, wow, I really feel like an idiot for not thinking about that, because they can get, I don't know, let's say Cassidy Pope, because I know she did one. They can get Cassidy Pope to do an album that changed her life, and now 2 years later, she won The Voice, and I bet people are still clicking on that 2 to 3 years later because she wrote that all the way back then, and people are really interested in her life. But then I thought about it more, and while I would still think that that's a really great feature, I probably didn't think about it because it's probably not something I would want to go out and find myself, or that I personally have interest in. So I think so much about it, like we were both just talking about, is like doing what you want to do. And I think we can both attest that some people in bands are just there to play their music and tour, and that's great. But hopefully there's at least one or two people in the band, right, that care sort of about the direction, and not the branding in a lame way, but just like the identity, because you as a band member have an identity, and your band is probably going to take that on in some shape or form, unless you're purposely like putting on an act. And that's okay too. And by act, I mean just like some bands go on stage wearing suits every day, or some bands go on stage wearing costumes, or something like that, to me is different than we're going to fake what we're doing.
Your gimmick.
Yeah. And gimmick versus identity. And that's really important, I would say, because having a good identity should be forever in your career. Like, it's very rare, I would say, for bands to completely change identities unless they're going through something that is truly life-changing, right? Like, a recent shift in identity, I think, would be against me following like Laura Jane Grace's transformation. And that's not necessarily, I don't know, that's just something that the public suddenly takes on a new identity of your band. But you're not that's clearly not a gimmick, obviously. But like, if you see a band for 10 years, or let's say 5, like Black Veil Brides, right? They wore we took pictures of them. I should put a picture in the show notes of what Black Veil Brides looked like 5 years ago, right? And that suddenly stopped working for them, so they changed what they did. And that has still been a success for them, but they clearly changed their identity, and that kind of makes it like a gimmick. They changed that because it wasn't really working anymore. And those are two very fundamentally different things. And it's so important, whether it's a website, whether it's like my website, or any band that any of us like or love, or all of it. It carries everything into what we do, and it carries, I think, into the longevity as well. And that longevity is so important for, one, your own personal goals and achievements, but also, hopefully about making this fun job your career, probably, right?
Yeah, I think what I would basically say to close this out is that, taking that thought seriously and always putting that thought into everything is definitely one of the things that separates the chumps from the pros. That you really have to always think about, what makes you special and what you can do that aligns with that specialness. What are your best assets and what makes your personality and what makes you different than everybody, and how do you keep accenting that and bringing that out in everything you do, whether it's your marketing plans, whatever hoaxes you're planning, to your merch.
Yep, totally. And so that is a good time for our first sponsor break. Once again, sponsored by Bad Timing Records. Bad Timing Records has a Park release coming out on July 15th. That's a week from tomorrow. And so that you can find that on a 10-inch vinyl EP with a screen print on the B-side. It comes with a book as well that has a prologue of a story frontman Lad Mitchell has been writing. It is very cool. It's my favorite vinyl release from the record that we've done, from the label that we've done so far. We also have a Knuckle Puck 12-inch in store that has a screen print B-side too, and we are working on a bunch of other stuff, as we'll talk about hopefully in the coming months. And, Jesse's been busy on that as well. So go to badtimingrecords.com. We're just about a year old now, and that's very cool to think. So thank you. Topic number 2. What a conflict of what a great way to transition. As Jesse and I sort of wanted to run through what we've been doing that may not be in the very public-facing eye right now, and not in a cocky sort of braggy way, but in the sense of how we're working through things to hopefully create something or bring something back to life or just evolve in what we're doing in cool and interesting ways. So Jesse, you can sort of pick, I guess, but you've been working on new books, and you've always also been working on a new app.
It's that is the case, all while making really cool records right now with Somos, Heiana, Osaka Popstar, Morning Glory. I somehow have been chugging away on this new book I'm writing, which is kind of all about creativity, and a lot about what we just talked about is how you get happy with the music you make, creative tools to help you be happier with the music you make as an artist. And actually, I should say this, that the book's mostly examples via music, but it's really about how you get happier with whether it's your life and any creative output that you do. It's all the things I've learned as a producer of like really good practices on, just how you develop better art. Like, kind of me just culling together, I've gotten to work with some of the most amazing songwriters in the world, and, getting to watch people like Robert Smith and how they go through a creative process. I'm kind of just doing every lesson I've learned over the years about that stuff and trying to put it into a tangible form that's brief and interesting to everybody. Like, unlike my last book, I'm trying to keep it around 250 pages instead of 750 pages. And
it's got to be difficult.
Yeah, well, considering we've been aiming for 250 and I have 210 written and I don't have half my notes checked off yet, it's definitely going to be difficult, and there's going to be a lot of shedding. But, we shed 300 pages from the last book to get it down to 700, because when we found out it was 1,000 pages, we were like, well, no one's reading that. That's part of the creative process, and that's we even talk about that in the book. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. And then I've been beginning to do interviews. I'm going to be doing a podcast all about creativity, where I interview different people. And I've been slowly starting to accumulate those interviews before I launch it, but I'm really stoked on it.
And so now that you're working with this new avenue, so the first book, I guess, would be sort of a stopgap to all things, how to make your band better, or in some fashion. And so with this, well,
more marketing and management, right, though, on that side. This is the creative music side, whereas that was the business side.
So have you had to put yourself in a completely different space, or was this something that you also considered putting in the first book, where now you have to stop yourself and say, this would be like, I can't ask someone to read 2,000 pages, let alone 1,000.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff was in the book initially, and we decided to focus the book a lot. Like I just said, we chopped out 300 pages. It was mostly stuff like this, as we took out a lot of the stuff that was based around music and how you make better music, and we took that out, and that's going to be this book. And Yeah, I mean, I think that it is a different headspace, though. The last book was a lot of me having to go on the internet and do research, and this book is mostly me pulling things out of my head and seeing examples of how people work through creativity. And then also I've been doing all these interviews with really cool people on creativity and what their creative process is, and it gives me ideas of how to make these into these more meta examples in the book. And just different outlets. I've been reading a lot of books on creativity and getting ideas from them, and just trying to figure out how I assemble all of that into something.
I mean, since we're probably going to be talking about this on and off now for the next amount of months, however long that is, how long did the first, I don't know that a lot of people know this either that would be listening, how long did the first book sort of take to finish and then get out into the world?
I started writing it 4 years and 1 month before it came out. I will say this, that, so I blogged a lot of the book on Musformation. I would just write down posts. I was managing Man Overboard in transit through a lot of that time, so I was just basically taking notes or writing blog entries on anything I did each day and anything I learned. I would just share it with everybody. But I would say it took me about 5 to 6 months to do the writing of the 700 pages, taking it from notes and blog posts into an actual book. And then the editing process took about 5 months, I'd say, because I had 5 different people read it. It was very important to me that a layman, an expert, somebody who didn't care and just read it for grammar, and then I had like another musician friend, and then I had Thomas, your partner, and Bad Timing do the serious grammar edit and make me have coherent sentences. So there was a lot of process to that, and this one won't be as torturous because I learned a lot from it, and but I'm still gonna have like a bunch of different people read it and give me notes, and I think that's a big part of the process of a book. Is it's really important that I'm to not be so boasty, but this book's the only thing I've ever done where on the internet there's been no trolling or anything. Like every review comes out great, but we put so much work in to make sure that everybody could understand it really, really, really well. And I think that that's a really important part of the process. We started this book about 3 months ago, I want to say, and I imagine it'll be out before Christmas. But
Really?
Because you know what? It's not a lot of research. It's a lot of just getting things out of my head. I've written 6,000 blog posts. I'm a fast writer. So
Writing a book, that would be terrifying to me. No, I couldn't imagine. I'm such a bad writer. I don't know. Well,
you're not a bad writer.
Well, I'm bad at writing.
Both compare ourselves to like.
I'm bad at getting myself to write. Maybe that's a better thing. I don't know.
And so am I.
I could not fathom. I have so many things where it's like, I'm going to write a blog about it. And this is everyone's problem who would like to blog, right? It's like, got this great idea, I'm going to write a blog about it. And then that never happens. And then I think about that in the sense of writing a book, and then I would cry, I think.
Well, but so to get into like some of what I write about in this book is that's just a muscle. And just like when you're exercising, you have to force through when that muscle's painful. And it starts getting sore, you have to keep going and pushing for that reward. It's just a muscle, and you have to do it. And like the other thing is too is you have to write a lot of bad things. There's so many times I've written blogs for you and your site where I do like 5 to 10 paragraphs. I write and erase them 2 to 3 times sometimes, and sometimes like I'll write you up like I have this idea. I haven't figured out how to say it yet, and I'll write it 3 or 4 times. I put a lot of effort into how to do it, and it's the same thing. Like there's so many passages of this book I've already rewritten 6 times to try to get it more coherent and find the like really good metaphor and the really good how meta should I get with it compared to how micro, and do I want to go trees or do I want to go forest with the idea, and like all that stuff's really important, and figuring out how to do it. That's part of the process, and you just have to kind of do it. I could also recommend Neil Strauss, who wrote like the Motley Crue book and like the Marilyn Manson book, and he's like one of the greatest writers of all time. He did a really great one on Tim Ferriss's podcast about when you're getting daunted at writing, some tricks he uses to do it. And he always says, while he may be a New York Times bestselling writer, he's a terrible writer who's terrible at doing it, but he's learned a lot of tricks for his mind to get good at it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it is about tricks, I think. Even, I mean, that's for any kind of creative thing, or probably anything really, but any kind of creative thing is just,
Yeah.
it's what you want to do. Hopefully you're passionate about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it comes easy. Yeah.
Yes, totally. So the other thing I'm doing is I've been working with an app called HiArt, which is HI-ART.
That'll be in the show notes.
Yes. So we make, or I should say they make, since I don't technically work for the company as much as I'm helping them with sales. I'm connecting them with musicians who want to make emoji, basically. It's basically emoji you can send to any of your friends. You buy a pack from a group. We got a lot of really cool groups who are working on their stuff to come out right now. We already have stuff up from Jason Zarrillo and Ghostface Killer, and there's a lot of other cool ones to come, but we basically just digitize designs bands already have and make it so fans can send it to each other in emoji form. And it's really exciting. Some of the stuff that's coming out is really cool. And yeah, it's really fun because I feel like it's a new frontier. It's like, when you've never been able to like make money off of digital art before, and this is a cool way of like, you got that cool merch design that kids are loving. You got that cool lyric for your bands. You make it into a little cartoon design, and now you can make money for it because, we're selling a lot of emoji packs from people, and people want that to be able to send to each other.
And so are you just enjoying like thinking about who then would work well for that, or like well, because there are a lot of bands in theory, I guess that would work well, right?
I think it actually works for everybody, but maybe that's just me believing in this. I think it's, it's just like that funny thing of like, that popular lyric all the kids sing, put it into a font and put it in your emoji pack. Put your logo into a font. Maybe draw a cartoon of the band members and doing something. Like, there's so many possibilities. It's such a cool new avenue. What excites me about this, so my good friend Paul, who is in a band called In Decay and American Distress, that came up with this. When he told me this, I was like, you know what? I just want to help out and, get this idea spread because I think it's a really exciting, new, cool thing and could really be an interesting way of bringing another avenue of income into bands. I mean, it's, basically free money for bands and something fun that people can enjoy and get something out of for very little money.
Yeah, and that is kind of the trick of getting revenue for a band. That's like new revenues for bands is kind of a very interesting thing because we still haven't really seen any truly new revenues in so long, besides streaming.
Yes.
But that only cuts away at some other stuff. So, it
Yes.
could be really curious.
We're going to talk about that more and more.
We will. Just be curious if that kind of picks up. But yeah.
So you have a new job.
I do have a new job. Hi, I am the label manager for J Tree Records.
So awesome.
So awesome. So yeah, so I don't know who would know. That's not something I'm really bragging about on the internet too much, but J-Tree Records is, hopefully everyone knows what J-Tree is, because that'd make my job easier. But J-Tree is, I would say, one of the what would you say? One of the most influential or notable punk, hardcore, indie labels, right?
I would say that they were the most influential label of the sound of punk, emo, and indie in the 90s. That the 90s into the early 2000s, they were one of the labels that was really shaping everything that is happening now and shaping everything. Like, it's so diverse. Like, you have a group like Lifetime, who was the first band that kind of brought pop punk and hardcore together, which now seems like such a basic thing, and there's so many things that have sprung from it. But they were the people who aggregated that into the mainstream. And then you get like a band like Turing Machine, who is like this weird electronic instrumental band, and I hear that band's record in so many groups, and and then you have all sorts of things like Promise Ring, Jets to Brazil, and there's just that catalog is so deep. Mile Marker, like I still hear versions of these bands everywhere I go, and they were the people who really aggregated a lot of the cool and interesting ideas in the underground. They were the people who brought it to a more mainstream place that influenced a ton of people.
Yeah, and what's so cool for me about this label is that diversity, and that's coming from someone that doesn't necessarily have the most diverse taste in music compared to someone like Jesse. Like, what I listen to is what I listen to, and sure, like, Blink-182 does not sound like brand new, or I don't know whatever bands I listen to. They don't necessarily all sound together, but they can be grouped together. And what's so interesting to me about J-Tree, and this is a conversation I had with a friend the other day, is just that like you can't put a box around J-Tree and call them this one thing. And I like that so much. And I think that's part of why they were so successful when they were at the peak of doing their label, is because there was so much for everyone, and those people didn't necessarily need to be the two same people. And that's so cool to me, because it's so rare, I think, that any label or company has that ability. And so
what are you doing with the label? What's the big idea?
So I approached the label in January, and to make sure this makes sense to people, one of my teachers at Drexel is one of the founders of J-Tree, and so that has always been my in, and one of the only things I've ever really enjoyed about going to school is just that there's at least one person that sort of gets where I am coming from. And his name's Darren, and I approached Darren with Thomas many months ago about maybe doing some stuff with their label, things that you can probably guess, we sat down for this conversation, and there's two founders. One is Darren, and the other is Tim, and Darren has always stayed in touch with everything because he is a teacher and he's still involved with things. But Tim had kind of checked out a little bit, because when they stopped being a really functioning label, it's kind of like vinyl was not selling. It was the utter peak of the neon stuff. There was no market for J-Tree to fit in anymore. So instead of sort of deciding they needed to sign a neon weird punk band, which probably didn't exist, like they didn't want to compromise their integrity to doing what they loved. So they kind of just cooled down for years. And when I had this meeting with them, Tim did not really realize fully that there are all these bands even like a Modern Baseball or a Title Fight or a Tiger's Jaw, where it was like truly still coming from the ground up in a way that had kind of disappeared at the later years of J-Tree's first run. And from that meeting on, Darren told me that Tim basically went home, and over the course of the next 24 hours sent him like 20 emails about like, whoa, did you see this band and this band and this? And they just got really excited again. So 6 months later, like I had a conversation with them, and their person that had been running their label, and a label manager formed to make sure that all the lights were still on, even though they weren't releasing new music. And so that means like keep paying royalties 10 years later. That person would have to be leaving. And I said, well, what about me? And so here we are. So this will be a conversation that hopefully we can talk about in exciting ways in months to come and years to come. But what I'm focused on doing is sort of bringing J-Tree back in a way that stays true to what they always have been at heart, because that's, to me, what's so cool about the label, like I just said a little bit ago, but to also bring them into the present as well. So if you noticed, like a month ago, J-Tree put all of their 135 records on Bandcamp for $5. And that's something that I brought up because we've talked about it kind of in excess in these 10 episodes about like that's what Run for Cover does when an album leaks. And so in my mind it was, well, why don't we put everything up here for just $5 because it's all back catalog stuff. Maybe there's a kid on Bandcamp who doesn't know who Lifetime is or who doesn't know who The Promise Ring is, but they like a You Blew It or a Modern Baseball, and maybe some of that'll connect. So there are these things like bringing the label into the present with something as simple as Bandcamp, but that created like a really big ripple. I don't know if you saw, Jesse, but like within 2 weeks, Pitchfork, AV Club, Brooklyn Vegan, and other sites had all written these love letters to J-Tree about their back catalog. And like, here are the 10 best things that you don't know about J-Tree, and you can get them for $5. So it was really cool. Like at this point, we actually don't even have a publicist working for the label yet. So all of these articles no one asked any of these articles to be written. They just went out on their own. And so what I want to do is sort of leverage J-Tree's past in a really cohesive way that makes sense for prior fans of the label and hopefully future fans of the label as well. And again, that will include, with no timeline set in stone yet, but that will include like reissues of the releases you can imagine that should be reissued, and signing new bands, but also doing doing 7 inches and other releases with other bands that are on other labels. And there's so much to work with, and that's what's so cool. I just get to hopefully like work with all these bands that are even outside of my scope of current knowledge, and I get to also expand myself, and hopefully that will help other areas of my life as well. But it's just so exciting. There's so much to bite off, and that's what's so stressful. But there's so much to work with, and I'm just so excited. Like, we have to get a new office, and I have to learn how to sort of like run an office in a really like boring, not corporate way, but in like a management kind of way. And I'm kind of excited to learn about that, because maybe that's something I should have learned about in school, but I clearly won't ever. And there are other perks as well, like Bad Timing Records will now be distributed by ADA through Jade Tree, and that's really exciting for us. And that helps out my other label as well, and it helps out Jade Tree too, because they get to be distroed through us and they get to have a lot of volume through us. So there are all these really interesting things that are only going to be figured out more and more almost every day, but certainly every week and every month through the rest of the year, I would say, and surely well beyond that. But I'm now pretty pumped, Jesse, so...
Nice. I'm really pumped for the first time you hear the Sex record and the Mighty Flashlight record.
I haven't heard those yet. I've not heard those yet, but I have been making my way through all the things I don't know. And some of this I'm like, some of it's really cool, some of it I don't like, but it's, I'm so excited. And this is something like I have never probably said before, but like I'm excited to get out of my comfort zone with this stuff, because there are I cannot sign everything that I want to sign to Jade Tree. And a lot of people have asked me, like, well, isn't that a huge conflict between Bad Timing and Jade Tree? And it's like, well, no, like, Jade Tree could not sign Knuckle Puck. Like, that would not work for them, because that's not what the label ever was. And I'm not trying to make the label something it's not. But me being at Jade Tree can help Knuckle Puck in ways that who knows how, and vice versa as well as for it's another band. So, like, I'm excited to get out of my comfort zone when Tim or Darren at Jade Tree send me some band and it's like some weird hardcore thing, and I'm like, I don't know what this is, and then I have to get into it. And I'm excited to open my mind as a music fan and as someone that needs to be comfortable working with all these bands. Hopefully, it's very cool to diversify myself now in this stuff rather than in 10 years from now or never, who knows? But that's like, it's just another cool perk of the job, I think. So that's what I'm doing. Ooh, we're busy.
Yes, we sure are.
We do some other things too. I wonder how we do it all together. There's a lot. So as we mentioned earlier, Jesse's book, Get More Fans, you can check out Get More Fans at getmorefansbook.com. It's a 700-page extensive guide with the resources and methods to promote your band, detailing everything you need to know to get people to listen to your music and the art around it. There's now 20 more pages, including a bonus chapter on the daily habits you can do to get fans for your music. And if you like the book, which I imagine you all will or should, you should also feel free to head over to Amazon and leave it a review, because, like Jesse said, there has not been too many troll cores on his comments on his book yet. And so hopefully that will stay the same. So the last topic we wanted to talk about was making good music. I don't know what we should title that. Making music that is inherently good is the wrong word. But why don't you walk us through your hypothesis?
Yeah, the tightrope act of how you come up with good music. So we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. Is I have a theory, and it's in the new book I was just talking about as well. It's the start of the new book, is that over the years, and so, my name's on over 1,500 records. I've worked with, so many bands over the years, and I've seen a common trait that when a band makes good music, it's always because they're making the music they want to hear, they're emotionally reacting to it. When a band comes in and they're like, well, we're going to make this because this is what's popular, those are the bands that I always see. They never even get up to 100 likes on Facebook, and no one cares. But all the bands that make the music they want to hear, there's at least some people who are passionate about it. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be successful just because you do that. You have to get good at making music, and you have to get good with doing these things that, like, get good with the creative tools that you have and get better at your instrument and all that stuff. But when you make music you think other people will like, it's inevitably a failure. And one of the other things I often cite is this is the tightrope act that you have to walk as a band when. So I use Blink-182 as an example all the time of like, you have Enema of the State, you have Dude Ranch, you have Take Off Your Pants, and then the self-titled record, everybody's like, whoa, that's a big change. And it's like, the reason the self-titled record is a great record that most fans accept as a great record, it's my favorite Blink-182 record,
Untitled,
is because they were making the music
cough.
they wanted to make. Oh, sorry, I forgot I'm with a nerd in my midst. But the reason it's a great record is they made, they couldn't sing about dog farts anymore, and they were listening to a ton of Cure records, and they needed to make that record, and it was the record they made they wanted to hear. They had emotional reactions to it, and it still worked with the fans. But I think that was the big thing of like when they came back the second time is they kind of tried to make what they wanted to hear, but it just wasn't working as well anymore. But, so you're like, okay, so what do you do if there's not a formula that's going to work every time? Like, that you're saying they made the music they wanted to hear both times and one didn't work. I think the biggest thing is that if you make the music you think people want to hear, it always fails. And that's why bands have to follow through. That's why Radiohead had to make Kid A and get rid of all the guitars. And I think that people really don't accept that. But the other thing that happens is, and what we wanted to get into after that is, so I'm a record producer, and I'm sometimes the guy standing here while the band that was known for their hardcore jam says, I think we're going to do a lot of slow ballads on this one. So I wanted to talk about how Zack and I as managers, Zack works at 2 record labels. What do you do when you get a record that you're just really not feeling from a band you loved and you're working with? Like, how would you handle that?
Yeah, I guess there's like the difference between, and you were just sort of saying this, like making something that you think the fan wants, but also then like how are you just saying a hardcore band that wants to do ballads? Like, well, like, do you really need to do all ballads? It's sort of each of our jobs in different ways to be like, is that really how you should be going on? But that doesn't necessarily mean you're catering to someone that's not yourself. It's just like, it's about how you frame everything, I guess. And so in my role, like as a manager, it might not be about truly the actual music that is being recorded, but sometimes it's something as simple as, well, how can we get what you are making from the bottom of your heart, like get across as great as it can? So Lightyears just announced that they'll be releasing a new EP called Temporary in September, and about not really a year ago yet, but let's say in October or November of last year of 2013, there's this long conversation about, okay, well, we probably got to get you back in the studio, you guys, sometimes to record a new record in the early spring, and so Pat, the singer of the band, who's also kind of the leader of the band, was like, yeah, okay, we're going to record a new record. And then, we didn't, and, maybe you hear me talk about Lightyears less than Knuckle Puck, and that's because Lightyears, beside, like, next to making music that I really, really love, is that it hasn't been catching on with everyone that we'd like it to be catching on with. And that's kind of the hard reality of being a manager, or obviously being in a band sometimes. So after a lot of conversations with my management team, one thing that came up was, well, do we actually need to make a record? Like, what about just making an EP? What if we can make, I don't want to say the best songs, meaning like if there were 6 more songs on a record, those songs wouldn't be good, but how can we get across Lightyears to new people after touring? Like, Lightyears did a really exciting tour with Neck Deep and Knuckle Puck, and was so great for everyone. And so after doing that tour, what if we release an EP sometime later that year, and maybe that'll come across in a simpler way to get those other fans, those potential fans, on board? And that was a really hard and kind of month to 2 month long conversation going back and forth with Pat from Lightyears about like, hey, like me personally as a fan of Lightyears, and that's the only reason I'm managing you, truly, like how, like I want a record, but maybe what the band needs right now is not a record. And so that's kind of the one end of my job, because it's really difficult. It really bummed the band out, kind of. Now now that everyone feels good because the songs are recorded and there seems to be excitement and all of that, but there are decisions every step of the way, and some of them are really easy and some of them are really difficult. And so I know you brought up the Radiohead thing, and that's like, That's a great example. Like, I wonder if they were really just like, well, fuck it, we're going to do this, or if it was a really long and hard conversation. And changing your sound versus doing an EP or an LP is much bigger, but it's all just how you look at it in the bigger small picture. And for me, like, having that whole conversation was really kind of difficult, because I saw the singer of this band I work with be like, no, like, I need to do a record. And I was like, well, like, you need to, and I want you to, but we can't do that right now for the sake of the band.
Yeah, and so I think that's the big thing, though, too, is, like, so creatively, like, so the reason I became a record producer is my bands would go into the studio and we'd get these, like, hair metal guys while we were making punk rock, and I'd try to be like, turn down the reverb, and they wouldn't listen to me. So I kind of made this vow as a producer that what I do when I hear somebody say something that I don't agree with. So, like, let's say it's something as simple as, let's put a guitar lead at the end of the song. And I'm like, that's cluttering up the song. I say my piece once. If I really disagree, I might say my piece twice. But at the end of the day, that's their creative decision. And I have enough humility to know that I'm not always right. But it gets really, really difficult when somebody, you're managing a band. One of the bands I managed for a short time, I really hated the direction they were going in, so I just quit. And I heard demos, and I totally just bowed out and said, you know what, like, I won't work hard. I'm not going to be motivated to do this when you guys are changing. And I think that's even a thing for me as a producer is I try to get demos from every band because I don't want to work with bands that I'm not really excited about the material. And it's tough because every band deserves somebody to be passionate about their music. But it's, there's a lot of money resting on this. I got to pay bills and everything. But I think there's another unsung part of this of, like, what about when the band, like, so you and I were discussing, like, this example of an article I wrote a few years ago where, the Claxons got sent back to re-record one of their records because the label heard it and they were like, this is just terrible. And that same, this has happened so many times to so many bands. There's kind of this unsung hero thing of, like, when the A&R or the manager, like, American Idiot, was supposedly stolen the first time, but the inside story I've always heard is that they played it for the management and the A&R, and they went, no way are you putting this out. And then they came out with one of the most classic punk rock records after they rewrote all those songs. And I think there's an unsung thing of, like, how you handle giving that feedback to musicians is because, like, I don't think the suits always know. Like, there's the famous Wilco story with Yankee Foxtrot that, like, the label passed on it and that turned out to be one of their classic records. And it's a very weird line to walk, and every situation always changes, but I think the biggest thing is you have to say to the band your honest opinion once, have them reconsider it, maybe then get a few more outside opinions, but sometimes it's also the thing of the band needs to just do the thing that's honest for them and what they're actually feeling, and if they fail, then that's the trajectory. But if they reconsider and say, you know what, maybe we didn't do this right, maybe they did, that could sometimes save the band's career.
Right. Also, like, you and I can be wrong a whole bunch too, obviously, and whatever role we're in. Like, it's been actually kind of cool to see this with some knuckle puck stuff over the course of just this year. Has been like, I will be in a rabbit hole thinking of all these weird scenarios because that's kind of my job, and then I'll kind of miss the point on something, and I'll have Joe from the band say, hey, like, well, this is kind of just what we want to do, and I'll go, okay, fine, whatever. Like, I just spent a day freaking myself out about this stressful situation, and then I'll go to the band and they'll just know, like, actually, no, we're just going to do this. And that's that. And it's kind of done. And then it can be, and then a lot of these situations that I've had, they've worked out for the better, and I'll go, wow, that was kind of dumb for me to freak out about. And maybe I'm doing a good job by freaking out about stuff to myself, but, often the bands, if they do know who they are, and I know we talked about this earlier, like, if they do have their own identity, they figure a lot of it out themselves just because who they are has connected with their fan base. So unless they're truly talking about creating some gimmick or something for themselves, like a lot of so much, the majority part of liking a band is the music, but people can also become grown attached to the personalities that go along with it, because you sort of get more of a sense of what that music means when maybe you know a little bit more about the band member. So if the band will tell me like, hey, no, like, let's just do this, sometimes it'll connect because I'm not thinking about it in that way. And maybe you're not thinking about it in that way as a producer either, or me as a record label or whatever. But, it's very important, I would say, to say that, like, we are wrong too a lot of the time. And a lot of time, like, first instinct for the band might work better. And I think that's something you can tell if you go at them once and be like, hey, don't love this guitar part. And then maybe it'll work out in the end. Maybe it won't, but hopefully it does.
Yeah. And I think that is the thing of it's just like, a lot of the time the band can see a vision, and I remember even there was a thing with I had my ear to the ground writing a music business blog, especially during the days when I was managing Man Overboard, but they'd be out seeing fans in the streets, and there would be some things that they just had more of a sense of because they were always out there and really in the thing. And it's it's one of the things that we talk a lot about in politics too, is the idea of that, these people sit in Washington, D.C., and they only talk to other rich people and they don't see what's actually happening out in the world, and they lose a grip on it. And I think it really is important to always have that zoom and consider things. It's even one of the things I say to people, when you're listening for the feel of a song, and if something's working right, if we got a good performance of a song, it's sometimes best to have somebody who's not a musician, one of the band's friends or girlfriends who don't even play an instrument, and just does this feel as good as this? And you play a practice tape in that, and they're not thinking about really technical things is the drummer rushing? They don't understand those things. They're just having an emotional reaction. That could be really important, but then just as important is somebody who knows why. So I'm the type of person, I can hear in a song, because I produce so many, that the reason this isn't working is because, the tempo is supposed to be pushing when it's pulling when it's pushing right here. And that's why this isn't working, and we should go back in and record it again. And all those things are really, really important in how you zoom and make decisions.
Yeah, there's just so much that goes into this whole thing of making the good music, and good is very subjective to everyone, but I think at the end of the day, good is kind of very personal, and that's what often makes it so great. Capturing that live feeling versus that recorded thing. Is there more heart somewhere than the other place? And it's something that's different for every band, every business, every person. But so much goes into it, and that's kind of I think what we wanted to hit on a little bit, is just that and it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy to think about, maybe a band will catch the ear of a producer or a manager or a label because of some, demo. They went into a random studio and recorded themselves with money they had saved up over 6 months. But then after that, there will be talk with the manager about what kind of direction they want to go in for the next release, and then they'll go in with the producer, and the producer will, do this or that, and then that final product is given back to the label and to the manager, and then the label and the managers say, well, how do we shape this to the public? And everything goes. It's kind of weird when you dissect it, how many different processes the creative aspect goes through, the creative process goes through. And, some of the biggest records in the world go through the same things as the smallest records in the world, or more or less, but everything goes through all these different steps. And it's kind of fascinating to just think about, what if you didn't harp on that one guitar line, or what if I didn't say, we should only be selling it here and in this web store instead of that web store. It's kind of crazy. It's just it's kind of like a butterfly effect thing, where it's just everything just affects everything else in this creative process.
Stop crushing on your man crush, Ashton Kutcher, dude. Come on.
Oh, love that guy.
Worst
Worst
dude.
Oh, okay. That's a different conversation. Do you have anything else to say about?
No, I had a crazy week, so I didn't really have much recommendation, but I clicked on the Jade Tree Records website while we were having that discussion, and so my recommendation is to be people should go back and they should listen to that Cap and Jazz discography. They should listen to that band Juno because they were amazing and great early emo. What else did I see in here that people should really hear? That Mile Mark, the New End original record. That's one of the greatest emo records ever made. Pedro the Lion. You guys have so much good stuff in here. Sweet Belly Freak Down. Go back and listen to this stuff.
I will just put Jade Tree discography.
Yeah, just go back and listen to this stuff. There is so much great music that shaped the music you're listening to today. If you're listening to this podcast, that went on from this label. It's just looking at this list again is stunning. It was my top 2 favorite labels growing up for many years.
Well, I was going to recommend 4 Year Strong because I saw them at Warped Tour yesterday, but now that sounds really weird with me having this job. So I'm just going to leave in your recommendations. Thank you to everyone for listening to Off the Record this week. Head to offtherecord.fm to check out show notes, to leave us any feedback. Jesse can be found at Twitter at Jesse Cannon. I'm at Zarrillo, and our podcast is at Off the Record FM. We'll be back next week.